Major changes to superannuation are on the cards, with Treasurer Jim Chalmers moving to block Australians from accessing their nest egg for anything other than retirement. Economist Chris Richardson joins us now. Chris, good morning to you. Why is the Treasurer climbing into this right now?
Because there is a problem. Here we are, more than 30 years into this system, trillions of dollars every year, billions of dollars of taxpayer subsidies. The nation still hasn't figured out what we're actually trying to do with super. That's what the Treasurer is aiming for here. If you figure out what you're trying to do, you can know what to do next.
All right, I think a lot of Australians have the view that if I need that money, it's not the government's, it's mine. I should be able to access it.
And that was that's what we saw during the pandemic, where the last government said, this is an emergency. If you think you're in real trouble, you can break that piggy bank. And a whole bunch of people did. Now, some people, it was a mistake, right? It went through the pokies. Ultimately, decades down the track, that'll cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. To be fair, there are a bunch of people, used that emergency funding well. But the government says, regardless, right, this piggy bank is now solely for retirement.
All right, but what if people do need it? I mean, you can't have people with X amount of money in their super who actually need the cash to survive for whatever reason, not being able to access their own money, right?
That's what the government is saying, that you won't be able to access it for anything other than retirement. Now, we don't know details, but it's saying, effectively, no, not to buy a home, not to have elective surgery, not for an emergency like COVID. They want super to equal retirement.
All right, interesting stuff. Let's see how it all plays out. We'll have you back on. Chris, thank you.
Welcome back. Treasurer Jim Chalmers has flagged major changes to superannuation, moving to block Australians from accessing their super for anything other than retirement.
Economics editor John Keogh joins us from Parliament House with more. John, good morning to you. This conversation, it's sparking fierce debate, isn't it? What's the Treasurer putting on the table here?
Yes, morning guys. Look, the Treasurer wants to legislate the objective of superannuation, and one of the things he wants to include in that is that superannuation should be preserved for retirement incomes. Now, we saw during the pandemic, the former government allowed $36 billion to be withdrawn from super to help people through that period. And Peter Dutton's Liberal Party now also want to give people access to their superannuation to buy their first home. Jim Chalmers says it should really only be used for retirement. I should point out there are already hardship allowances in super, so if you've got a serious medical condition or you're about to have your home foreclosed by the bank, you are able to access it, and that would continue under Jim Chalmers' proposition as well.
So he said that Australia was on track to spend more on super tax concessions than the age pension by 2050. So is that sustainable?
Yeah, look, David, I think superannuation tax concessions are very, very generous in this country, particularly for very high balances, multi-million-dollar accounts. And once you hit retirement as well, most people pay no tax on their investment in earnings in their account as well. And I think Jim Chalmers is starting a conversation about this, pointing out it's going to cost more than the pension, and that probably something needs to change. And you could expect, I think, an initial move in the May federal budget is quite likely. There's been talk about potentially putting a cap on superannuation. The industry's pushing for a $5 million cap, which is still pretty high, I've got to say. Yeah. And so the government will have to sort of come up with a figure in its mind, whether it's $5 million. Maybe it'll be a bit less, but let's wait and see.
How many people is that likely to impact in that bracket?
Yeah, look, not many people have more than that amount in their superannuation. It's only about 11,000 people. So, and it wouldn't raise that much money for the government, Sylvia. So that's why I do think if they're actually interested in trying to plug a bit of hole in the revenue that they're leaking on the super tax concessions, they're probably going to have to look elsewhere, if not in this budget, over the future years as well. So while they might start at just that very high end, it would not surprise me if over time they do crack down on the super tax concessions that affect more people.
Interesting. Good to get your insights, John. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yes, she's got other things to talk about, but I'm really upset about the schnitty. Talk to me.
How many breadcrumbs are we talking about on these schnitties?
This is why we stayed home and this is why we make our own food. Palmy schnitties at $40, that's just crazy.
It is, but that's what's happening out there. Yeah. All right, the other stuff you want to talk about, more and more people relying on financial hardship assistance. Yeah. This is part of the reason why everything's so expensive. How can the financial hardship assistance affect your credit rating?
Well, short answer, it actually doesn't. So that is some good news. This is probably one of the biggest changes that we've had on our credit reports. It came in on 1 July, whereby if you go to your lender and say, hey, I can't afford to make these repayments, I need to get into some kind of arrangement, they're going to mark your history now. It will stay on there for 12 months, but it will not affect your credit score. And that's important to know, because obviously as we move forward, a lot of people are going to start thinking about, should I go into financial hardship? Will it impact me?
Now, the new rules were introduced last year and they're starting to appear in the credit report.
Yeah.
Has it been good so far?
I was speaking to Equifax, spoke to the 4 major banks around this as well. So what you'll actually see now is that if you put your hand up and say, I want to get into arrangement, you're going to be better off than missing it and going to default. I'll give you an example. This particular person defaulted on their loan on April 1. On their report, it will show missed payment. But then they think, gee, I need to get into an arrangement. So what it shows is that so long as they pay their arrangement, the O stands for, yes, they actually paid it, and the A stands for temporary. They won't be affected at all, and that's kind of what you see on your credit report.
Obviously, it's seen cost of living pressures, as we saw with the Schnitty index. Don't you reckon? The Schnitty index?
Absolutely, that's how everything's
more
valued.
people entering hardship arrangements because of it, right?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, this Schnitty index that you're talking about. It's interesting. The 4 banks are saying they're yet to see a material impact on financial hardship. NAB, for example, has about 13,000 customers on financial hardship arrangements. It's gone up from January last year compared to January this year. But what we're seeing is that people are starting to miss their repayments on other things and the cost of living pressures. So basically, this is the calm before the storm. More people are going to be entering into these types of arrangements for sure.
What do you think about that?
Look, Sarah, I think that there should be no stigma attached to actually putting your hand up and saying, I need help. If I can just say, a lot of people don't know how to approach it. There are some great template letters. I had a go with them last night, just putting in my name. Basically, let's say I've got a problem with one of my lenders, one of my loans, and it will generate the letter for them, and you can email it directly to them. So I would give that a go if you are in a situation, but get help before things get worse. Because once you put your head in the sand and you default, then your credit rating is really...
Come to some arrangement before you default. Hopefully
yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Good on you, Effie.
Well, cutting back on everyday items like coffee and meals out might seem like a good way to save, but there are other ways to get cash back in your pocket.
So, money columnist for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, Joel Gibson, joins us. Joel, good morning to you. People are already tightening day-to-day budgets, we know that, but is it making any difference at all yet?
Oh, I fear not. I fear not. You know, there was some research out from NAB last week saying 4 in 10 people have cut back on their barista coffee and going out less. You know, they're taking lunch to work. Well, that brought to mind the great Australian phrase, pissing on a bushfire for me.
Yeah.
If you're one of those 800,000 people whose loan is about to go from 2% to 6%, and I'm one of them, that's just not going to cut it, and we need to get serious about cutting our spending and finding some really big savings.
Are you worried?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm worried. I mean, look, we've got a plan. We're putting money aside in an offset account. We've been doing that for a bit over a year now since we bought our house. Everybody who's in that situation should have a plan like that, and they're now going to have to bring that plan forward by a year or two, because that 2024 promise, not promise, whatever you want to call it, from the RBA is now, you know, going to happen a couple of years earlier.
Okay.
That's the reality.
Let's climb in. Tips.
OK, let's look for some really big fish, OK? Let's get real about what you need to save. The average mortgage is going up by $15,000. A lot of us, I have a much bigger than average mortgage. So where's some real savings you can make? Obviously, if you go interest only, you're going to pay a slightly higher interest rate, but you could save around $6,000 a year in the short term on your loan if you go interest only. That's one to think about. What about the second car? I mean, I just did the rego and insurance renewal on our second car, which we hardly drive. If you add up the fuel costs and the servicing, $3,000 to $4,000 is the cost of having a car on the road for a year. That's got to be in people's sights, I think.
Yeah, we've only got one car at home.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will end the year with one car at home for that reason. The other big one is private health insurance and private schools. Now, at the moment, the private schools lobby, for example, is saying people are reluctant to take their kids out of private schools. I think by the end of this year, that will also be a different story.
It's expensive.
You know, up to $40,000 now per child. And obviously, people don't want to force changes upon their kids before they make sacrifices themselves.
It's horrific, isn't it?
$5,000 private health insurance, average family policy, that's got to be in the crosshairs as well. And then the big one, the nuclear one, is can you either rent out some or all of your home, live somewhere cheaper, or the reality is, we've had Mark Burris on the show recently saying some people are going to have to sell. It's not the end of the world, you know. life goes on. He told his own story, you know, went on to sell his business Wizard Home Loans for $500 million after having to sell the family home.
You just got to try and get through this period.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
This year is going to be very tough, and we need to get real about what we need to save and start looking at some of those big sacrifices, because cutting the coffees and the Uber Eats, it's just not going to cut the most.
Yeah, right.
Won't be enough.
Good
You've got
stuff,
to be
Joel.
practical. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, mate.
Hey there, Today fans. Sarah and...
What's my name again?
Oh, my goodness. Karl.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel, though. Subscribe now for more news, special reports and amazing Aussie stories.
And Karl misbehaving,
Whoa,
of course.
that never happens.
Always happens.
What's she talking about?
Always happens.